Good afternoon. We are still waiting for Serhiy Leshchenko, one of our speakers, but I nevertheless start and welcome everybody from Ukraine and Germany. We are live on Facebook, so also welcome to those watching on Facebook. Today, we want to look at the first year of the Zelenskyy presidency and trying to take a resume of what has happened. My name is Marieluise Beck. I'm a program director for Ukraine at the Center for Liberal Modernity. And this conversation today is part of a project that we're doing together with the East Europe Foundation and is funded by the German MFA, German Foreign Ministry. So nearly exactly a year ago, Zelenskyy was inaugurated as the president of Ukraine. And shortly after this past summer, he was able to secure a so-called mono majority, an absolute majority in Ukrainian parliament. And today we want to look at his achievements, certain setbacks, and also maybe distill trends and look forward into the second year of the Zelenskyy presidency. And I think it's fair to say that the first year of Zelenskyy was a tumultuous year. And despite him providing nearly no promises, he did in fact promise certain things. And we will reflect on them with our distinguished speakers today. So he promised to bring new people to power. He promised to fight corruption, modernize the economy, and end the war in Donbass. These are big promises, and we're going to try to look into them a little bit in depth. For that, I'm joined by a stellar lineup by experts from Germany and Ukraine. Let me begin with Marieluise Beck, who's joining us from Berlin. She's a longtime Green Party politician, and until 2017, she was member of the Bundestag. And after leaving the German parliament, she co-founded the Center for Liberal Modernity, where she now is the director for Eastern European politics, or Eastern Europe, and my boss. Also joining us from Ukraine is Oleh Rybachuk. He, since 2009, or in 2009, he created and co-founded the Center for United Action. Many of you know it as Center UA. And he's a long-time participant and observer of Ukrainian politics. Before creating the Center for United Action in 2009, he was also advisor to President Leshchenko and briefly served as chief of staff to Leshchenko. Joining us is also Dr. Hanna Shelest. She is head of security programs at the Foreign Policy Ukrainian Prism Institute. Many of you know it. They publish in-depth analysis of Ukraine's foreign policy. And at the Ukrainian Prism, she's editor-in-chief of Ukraine Analytica, UA Ukraine Analytica. Also joining us is Professor Dr. Olexiy Haran, who is a professor at Kyiv Mohyla Academy, one of Ukraine's best universities, where I also happen to teach. And he is also the head of research at the Democratic Initiative Foundation, a renowned pollster and think tank in Ukraine. And joining us in a bit, shortly, I hope, is Serhiy Leshchenko, who is a former member of the Ukrainian parliament. He joined as one of the Euro-optimists on the blog Poroshenko. And he's now a blogger and columnist. He writes, among other things, for the Kyiv Post. And it's important to note that he's now a supervisory board member of Ukrainian railroads. So he has contacts with the government. I want to begin with foreign policy. Again, I already alluded to that. It's been a tumultuous year. Ukraine was involved in the impeachment saga. Ukraine lost an airliner shot down by Iran, and Ukraine is, as all countries in the world, dragged into the corona crisis. But I want to begin with you, Hanna, and then I'll come to Marie and ask you how you would characterize the first year of the Zelenskyy presidency in foreign policy beyond Donbass. We'll come to Donbass and his approach to the peace in a second. But maybe you can shed some light on the first year of his presidency in foreign policy terms.
Thank you, Mattia. Definitely, it's quite an interesting year to evaluate. The Ukrainian Prism used to evaluate the foreign policy of Ukraine for the last 5 years annually, and probably 2019 was the difficult for us to evaluate elections, presidential and parliamentary, and then with the new team that also managed to change twice in terms of the foreign policy, because as we know, we had within this year of Zelenskyy presidency 2 ministers of foreign policy. So that's definitely influenced both priorities, but also the tactics of realization of the foreign policy. There are several things that probably is necessary to emphasize. First of all, both the presidential and parliamentary elections and later time in office for President Zelenskyy demonstrated that foreign policy is not his top priority. Domestic policy is first. Foreign policy sometimes second, sometimes going even further, because when we speak even about the second, we are speaking predominantly about the United States of America, France and Germany as participants of the Minsk process, and a few other countries depending on the immediate interest. So we haven't seen the demonstration of the President Zelenskyy vision for the foreign policy. Only within the last months as we started to see a little bit, and again, it is very vivid and very probably classical for his style of the political development. So first of all, it is the emphasis to the economization of the foreign policy, as it is called. So diplomacy now became second to the export promotion, and most of the tasks that we recently heard are about the promoting Ukrainian exports going to the new markets and dealing with assistance of the Ukrainian business or foreign business in Ukraine. As one of our colleagues wrote, attracting investors became better priority than attracting allies. So definitely what we see is that consolidation of the international support in fighting Russian aggression is not articulated anymore as his foreign policy priorities. The second new that we can see, or at least the second what has been articulated, it is the necessity to improve relations with neighbors. So he proclaimed it last year, but in practice, what we saw that for the long time, it was only a few statements about Poland and Hungary, where we can see the certain improvement of the climate. It's not relations yet, because it was only statements, not the actions in this direction. But at the same time, we managed to spoil relations with Georgia. So that's definitely is one of the best demonstrations of the absence of coherence in his foreign policy. And the very new one that, let's see, will it be the new priority? It is what the Ministry of Foreign Affairs announced, that Ukraine need to develop the Asia strategy. So we can't say yet that it is the Zelenskyy priority, but at least that is a priority of his new Ministry of Foreign Affairs that we have for the last few months after the new year. So that is the desire to look to the Asia beyond Europe and NATO, as we name it, because Europe is still the top priority, at least in the statements of neither minister nor president declining that it has remained our top priority, the future European and NATO membership. But Asia, with all its potential, not only China, but Japan, India, Bangladesh, Thailand, Central Asia, that for many years been lost for Ukraine, have certain chances to become the new priorities of the Ukrainian foreign policy for the next 2 years. So the general conclusion, if to make it short as for the beginning, that even that the president is the main person who should be in charge of the foreign policy according to Ukrainian constitution, we see that this sphere is not very interesting for the president. So we can evaluate mostly the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, but, and here as always in Ukrainian politics is one big but. And this but is that we see the division of labor. When office of the president with his closest idea are responsible for the top important topics, such as relations with the France, Germany, the United States of America, Normandy format Minsk negotiations, and Russia. And the Ministry of Foreign Affairs have the right to develop the new markets, new directions, new ideas, and be in charge of the probably new tracks for Ukrainian diplomacy.
Right. Marie, maybe I turn to you now because we left aside Donbass and we'll come back to Hanna to Donbass. We heard that the presidential administration is in the driver's seat when it comes to the Donbass policy. And I wanted to ask you, we've had a great podcast for the German listeners. I highly recommend you to check it out, where Gwendolyn Sasse and Marieluise were reflecting on foreign policy a lot. But why don't you, Marie, kind of take stock of the foreign policy when it comes to the Donbass? What has been achieved and how does Berlin, if we can say so, view the progress that Zelensky has achieved?
Yes, when I listened to you, Hanna, I thought, oh boy, I'm a little narrow-minded because, to be honest, when I think about Ukraine at the moment, I don't think about their relation to Central Asia, not even China or anybody else. I think about peace within the country, which for me is a topic of foreign politics because, and quite a few people in Germany still have not understood, and the Russian propaganda is trying to hide, you don't have a war between Ukrainians within your country as an inner affair. You have an aggressor coming from the outside. And so if you're a country in war, foreign politics means how can we end this war? And from what I understand, this was one of Zelensky's big hopes. I have to admit, and I think no matter how many criticism you had towards Poroshenko, one should not forget that once in a while, democracy is a little unjust. And Poroshenko made a lot of mistakes, but when he was negotiating Minsk, and I think it is a very bad mandate that came out of it, he had 2,000 soldiers being encircled in the Balsavo. And how can you negotiate when you have this around your neck? So we have this Minsk, and the basic question is, number one, how can it happen that all those years Russia can appear as if it was a neutral partner in the Minsk process like France and Germany are, although we all know Russia is partner in this war, number one. And this, I think, is not only the Ukrainian part, to make that clear and transparent, but it is part of the partners which Minsk means. And unfortunately, I think what you must say, and we coming from the so-called West must say, we are not steady partners all the time. There is questions, where is the West heading for? There is even some who asked, is there still any West? Can any government, no matter whether it is Poroshenko, has been Poroshenko, or now Zelensky, can they rely on the West? And we all were a little upset in the Munich Security Conference when Mr. Macron was saying that sanctions towards Russia don't have any effect. Still, he thinks they should be kept up. But I mean, if you say something like that publicly, that is a message. And Kremlin will understand. So we have this ending the war, which I think is the part of foreign politics. And the question is, are the preconditions correct? Do we really have different partners, the so-called separatists and Moscow? Do they want to end this war? And this is something which we don't know. I'm more on the pessimistic side. I'm more on the side that a prosperous Ukraine, no war, no corona, would be one of the biggest challenges for the Russian Federation. And they know that very well within Kremlin. And that is why they love to keep this fire, turn it up one day, turn it down the next day, and so on. So the problem is, what did he promise? Was he clear enough? Did he have a clear enough picture, or was he naive about what he would be running into, in what a international situation, with Normandy, with not Weimar anymore, Poland being kicked out, and a very problematic, let's put it that way, American president who's not at his side anymore. So I think, yes, he has been bringing some prisoners home. From the humanitarian side, it was unbelievably important for the people. Unfortunately, again, Russia was smart enough to smuggle in those 24 salespersons who by the International Sea Court would have had been to be handed over anyway. So to be honest, this Zelenskyy negotiated, and he got something, but he paid a lot for it. And then we had the next meeting, in the Normandy meeting. Everybody over here was so happy that finally they were sitting back at the table. They at least made some concrete steps which were negotiated. And I think we have May now, and nothing of that has really happened. So the facet which I look at is foreign politics. The outcome is not very optimistic, but I would be very careful in saying it is because Zelenskyy did not manage it well enough. Maybe it is a mission impossible under circumstances which not only Ukraine has created, but which the West has created and still is creating.
Thank you, Marie. Hanna, maybe you want to add, just to conclude the Donbas part, because there's a lot of criticism by Ukrainian civil society that Zelenskyy tried too hard, and this, what Marie calls the mission impossible. But maybe you want to add to how you see his Donbas policy. And while you speak, don't worry, we'll have a small questionnaire for the audience, so you can click something, but we speakers can't answer, so it's a small questionnaire.
Mission impossible under those circumstances. Please, there never is a mission impossible under those circumstances.
Hanna.
It was really interesting to hear. I agree with you that when the country at war, you need to pay a lot of attention. And the problem is that we can't say that he really paid this attention or was so serious. Security was not his top priority. He wanted to concentrate more at the domestic, as real domestic, I mean, economics, some issues with taxation maybe, or parliamentary elections. And the best proof or evidence for this, if you analyze the governmental program, and as we can imagine, especially the first government, it was completely his government. Yep. So there are no words about consolidation of the international support to fight Russian aggression. You can't find it as the governmental priorities at all. Later, you saw several steps that were so tactic that even violated certain, or let's say disturbed the strategic goals of Ukraine. For example, when he was eager to allow Russia not to fulfill their obligations and to return Ukrainian sailors, according to the decision of the Hamburg Tribunal. Also, definitely, we can say that he was quite a naive. But this naivety is coming from his statements, if you remember, that I need to sit with Putin and to look into his eyes, and with this we can solve all problems. I think that after 5 years of war, it was already understandable for all involved people that just to sit and talk with Putin is not something that can change the situation. So on practice, the year of his Donbas policy is demonstrating two very serious things, or better say even three. First is that he chose human-centric approach, putting the lives of the prisoners higher than the national security. We are not discussing now, is it good or bad? It is just a fact. And because of this, we saw the example then, for example, Mr. Tsemach was returned back to Russia when he was one of the main evidences in the Hague court because of the MH17. So that is point number one. And it gave Russia a possibility to manipulate because they were just capturing more people, negotiating as much as possible, and Zelensky was ready to any compromises just to get Ukrainians back. Number two is that tactics above strategies. He was ready for the short successes. He was ready to the big compromises, not looking how these compromises can violate the long-term strategy of going against Russian Federation. And we had several incidents where we could really disturb, for example, our cases in the international courts, or we could lose the support of the international community just because of these short-term tactical steps. And the third element to consider is that we couldn't hear the single voice inside of Ukraine. So it was our fault as well that we were losing a little bit the international community support, because we could hear at least the voices of Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Presidential Office, a few of his advisors, as Mr. Sivoha, some other people like members of the parliament, and on certain moments of time, these voices were speaking completely different things. So when Ukraine itself couldn't consolidate its position, it was quite difficult to speak about the international support. I think that we gained much more than, honestly, many experts expected back in July, like saving the sanctions and some other things.
And that side event group that was being created, which irritated the Chancellor's office and the Foreign Office a lot, if I may say so.
Exactly. Many steps like this. So why I started about, like you said, that only Minsk and peace in Donbass should be like the top priority for the foreign policy. And why I spoke also about the wider geography, the reason is very simple. In international organizations, Ukraine needs support because Russia is fighting perfectly in the United Nations, in the Council of Europe, in many other organizations. And if we don't have support of the smaller states, that's where Russia is perfectly playing. African, Asian, Latin American countries, where Ukraine almost doesn't have the same strong partners as in Europe that could assist. And when voting for Ukrainian resolutions, you have not 100, but 60 votes. It gave more arguments to the Russian Federation to show that we are losing this support. That's why it's time after 6 years to widen geography.
Okay, very briefly, Hanna, yes and no. We had this survey and I'll show you the results. Did Zelensky cross a red line with his Donbass policy? I know your organization signed up, and I will come to Oleh Rybachuk in a second, to a list of demands in 2019, red lines. So yes or no, did he cross, in your opinion, red lines with his Donbass policy or not?
Still not. But let's see. We don't know what is his personal red lines.
Very good. Now I want to turn to Oleh Rybachuk and then also close the foreign policy. But nevertheless, I want to address one last lingering and very important point. Marie already alluded to that, which is the US. And I also said Ukraine was dragged against its will into this impeachment saga, into this big mess. And Oleh Rybachuk, you've been observing Ukrainian politics for a long time. And how much has this Trump-Zelensky call damaged the US-Ukrainian relationship, which is crucial in security dimension? This is the one question, and maybe you can connect it with the recent revelations. There were new tapes by Biden and Shokin. So how do you compare this Joe Biden demanding the dismissal of a prosecutor general with Trump demanding Zelensky to find dirt? How do you put that into perspective? You're still on mute. We can't hear you just yet.
On mute. Okay.
Yes.
Do you hear me now?
Perfectly.
Yeah, okay. So I just wanted to say that today in the news, there is one line saying that Trump has sent his special envoy to Ukraine and you can guess to do what? to raise, to hit, to accelerate the issue. It's clear for me that Zelensky at the beginning, during this famous, in brackets, talk over phone, well, he was trying to flatter the guy who is just happened to be the most powerful person on this earth. So I didn't blame him much for this. Then after that, more or less, we have backed off until now, until recent developments where we got new tapes. The guy who presented these new tapes, I know very well. He is ex-colonel of KGB. His father was for many years head of Ukrainian security, close aide to Kuchma. So this is so-called old guard. And the guy is strongly anti-Ukrainian, clearly pro-Russian, no doubt about this. But it's clear for me also that it's a situation, it's like with coronavirus, when we discuss now that we are almost on winning side and we are relaxing situation. I hope same story in Germany, but lots of experts are talking about second wave in autumn. Same for us. It looks to me like with this tape scandal, it's now a second wave, which might be more dangerous, because it's much more difficult now to try to play two parts. And moreover, Ukrainian new government, new person, new prosecutor general demonstrated lack of understanding and too much eagerness to demonstrate that she is willing to please, I don't know, to please Zelensky, to please Trump. But there was a couple of criminal cases opened exactly on this Biden-Shohin story. So I don't think we are doing well here. And I agree with co-speakers who have emphasized that for Zelensky, foreign policy was not priority. But I tell you an open secret. There was probably the only person who just happened to be ex-minister of foreign affairs, Petro Poroshenko, paid attention to foreign policy, but he was also micromanaging it. Other presidents were not good at all in foreign policy. None of them. Historically, just happened so we never had our own foreign policy. So it's a big problem. But the global problem is institutional. Whoever you get in this place, I don't know, the guy who was occupying all the positions in foreign internal policy, without changing the governance system, it is extremely difficult to manage my country. And I'm pretty positive we have to learn from this. It's not about personalities here.
All right, we'll come to institutions and domestic politics now, and this is a reoccurring theme, the lack of institutions and certain rules. I want to bring in Olexiy Haran and now turn briefly to polling, because there's an interesting appearance or interesting publication. The rating group last week published a poll, a representative poll, showing that 68% of the respondents are happy and content with Zelensky's performance in the first year. And the same poll showed that 57% trust Zelensky and about 40% would even vote for him. I know, Olexiy, you've done similar polls, but also your own poll and you've asked experts who scored Zelensky's performance much worse than the public has. So long story short, I want to ask you about public opinion and why this big gap between the expert community and what seems to be the electorate.
Oh, thank you, Mattia. Well, I would like to rely on two polls that were done on the eve of the first anniversary of Zelensky. One, which you mentioned, is by rating group. The second is by Kyiv International Institute of Sociology. And the results of both polls are very ambivalent. Because if you ask people, because after Zelensky's election, most Ukrainians considered that Ukraine finally is going in the right direction. Now, according to the poll you mentioned, by rating group, 50% considers that Ukraine is going in the wrong direction. If you see the results of Kyiv International Institute of Sociology, And the question is whether Zelensky is effective in fighting corruption. The answer is no. Economic situation, no. Donbass, no. And finally, what is the personal rating of Zelensky? And it appears that his personal rating is still higher, and he has the approval of more than 50% of the population, both in rating poll and in Kyiv International Institute of Sociology poll. So this is a paradox. His policy is not effective, and at the same time, Ukrainians still trust him. So this is clear, this is a paradox. And we need to understand that the personal rating of Zelensky somehow is different from the real results of his policy. He's very good in PR, but not only. You know, common people still believe that it's a guy like us. It's not Poroshenko, it's not Tymoshenko and other high-level, top-level politicians from the past, but he's new, he's trying to do his best, you know. So this is very surprising result, actually. And right you are, if we have elections right now, he would be re-elected. His party now, the rating of his party is lower by 10% than the result of his party during elections, but still, it's number one in the polls. Regarding the expert poll which we did, Democratic Initiatives Foundation, we asked the experts from the regions actually, and I'm thankful to Hanna for participation. And maybe Hanna is partially responsible for the result of this poll, but in total, it's a secret. We don't know, you know, how she voted, but the poll is he got 3 out of 10. So basically, experts are much more critical about Zelensky. And this is totally different with Poroshenko, because Poroshenko was low in the public opinion ratings, but he was highly appreciated by experts. And here we have a different situation. So actually, based on that, we may analyze, you know, very, very mixed results in the domestic politics. On a positive side, actually, there are some laws which finally were approved. For example, the law on land reform, and again, which is positively assessed by the experts. But Ukrainians, the public opinion is against this law. So again, we see the paradox. Finally, Zelensky had to approve the law on the banks, which is known in Ukraine as anti-Kolomoisky law. And actually, Zelensky did what the experts predicted from the very beginning of his re-election, that at some point he is to dissociate himself from Kolomoisky. And finally, you know, having this dilemma of choosing between Kolomoisky and IMF, Zelensky logically chose IMF. So these are positive, some positive examples. There are some others, but frankly speaking, not very numerous. And we see very dangerous trends connected with Zelensky. First is monopolization of power. Okay, and I may give you examples of removing the Central Electoral Commission, which was a very, very bad step. Central Electoral Commission was accused of behaving not good, despite the fact that actually, you know, the elections in Ukraine were conducted in a very democratic way, and Zelensky and his party won the victory. But nevertheless, Zelensky decided to dissolve it. Why? Because he needs to have his own Central Electoral Commission. The other step, which is very symbolic, is the removal of Prosecutor General, who showed some signs of being independent, you know, and the present Prosecutor General is totally under the influence of Zelensky. There's no choice, there's no doubts about that. If we are talking about institutions, I think actually the very good example is what we have in the foreign policy spheres. I will draw this example because we see the concentration of power in the hands of the head of his office. Presidential Chief of Staff, Mr. Yermak. And here, again, if we analyze the general picture in Ukraine, we see that what is positive? The positive thing is reaction from the civil society. And in many cases, you know, the civil society is playing positive role. Again, the example is the movement No to Capitulation. And this is very, very important because for Zelensky, who is still the main enemy? The main enemy is not Mr. Putin. The main enemy, strangely enough, is Mr. Poroshenko. And whenever Zelensky faces criticism, both in foreign policy and in domestic policy, you know, he always switches sides, he always shows to Poroshenko. So unfortunately, this is a bad sign. And, you know, I would say even that psychologically, Zelensky is to cope with this phenomenon. So he should be much more tolerant toward criticism, towards civil society. We are not his enemies, we are his friends. But somehow, whatever we are doing, you know, is viewed that this is done by Poroshenko.
Maybe I can cut you in here and show you guys the results of the poll that we have conducted here. You can see this small poll. So our viewers view Zelensky's performance of the first year somewhere in between. Yeah, you can see the results on the screen. But I want to bring in Oleh Rybachuk again on this trust paradox, and then move into the third block, which is domestic politics, which is one of the most important blocks, as we have heard. I wanted to ask you about the level of trust. Olexiy Haran has said that Zelensky surrounds himself with people who he trusts and he monopolizes power. How unusual is that? He, as certain people have found out, the Ukrainian Committee of Voters, I think it's called, that Zelensky gave power, 30 people that he put into legislative positions, into positions in the executive, people who he knows personally. So how unusual is this trusting, relying on loyal, but some critics would say incompetent people in putting them into positions? How would you see this level of trust and the personnel policy?
I think that Zelensky and his team, a couple of years before elections, clearly realize how people, if not hate, how they dislike the system which was operating in Ukraine for 20-something years. So-called old guards, old style, old nomenclatura. In reality, we had half a dozen people who were either prime ministers or presidents, and they are the same bunch of people. They are part of the system. And smartly enough, Zelensky campaigned with the slogan that we are so different. We will build very different country. We will not keep the old, decaying, corrupted system. We'll build you up a new Ukraine. We came here for one term. We don't care. We don't stick to these positions. And we will prepare nice platform for the next generation. I don't care about this position. I don't, yeah.
May I come in for a minute? Because having been 40 years ago, the one who was started with the Green Party, we said anti-party organization, nothing with parties, they are all mad. We said anti all the others. We are the alternative, the one and only alternative. We looked different, we behaved different. We told the people that we would give 2/3 of our salary from parliament away. Many of those elements, you know, we were young, some were good looking, some were not good looking, but it was exactly something of what people wanted. Although German parliamentarians were much, much, much more solid, I would say, you know, but the people wanted something new, which looked modern. And if I just interrupted you, I will give it back to you in a minute. But when I was at the Yes conference and I saw Zelensky the first time physically and cabinet members, I wrote to the president's office, give them a chance. They are all young, they speak English, They look modern. They don't wear ties. Give them a chance. It looks like it is really a group of people who is very decided to now go ahead towards a modern society. Back to you.
Exactly, exactly. And moreover, they use green colors everywhere, so they influence your subconsciousness as well. But you are right. Probably the difference between Ukraine and Germany is that you have long time party traditions and party build up infrastructures. I remember one friend of mine told me that a German researcher came to Kyiv and he wanted to see the pub where young supporters of Zelensky party get together. And he was very much shocked that there are no such pubs. And Ukrainians have been very much shocked that theoretically party could have infrastructure and talk to informal platform for discussion. So here we are very different. But again, Zelensky played this game very well. Again, the fact that he came from show business. Again, the fact that he has rehearsed his role as the Goloborodko, or the main actor of the movie parts. I've never watched that movie, but experts say that Zelensky, as any actor, when you are playing some role, you became part of it. So he was already a couple of years living in artificial presidency. And he is good at this. I guess even he is honest, because I'm also not system man. I was not member of Communist Party. So when I got into government, I had certain naive things like Zelensky has. But he was convinced, and I probably believe that he believed himself that he can change the things, that just defending his right not to be part of nomenclatura by the way he dressed, by the way he organizes public events, by many things, where deep in my heart, I believe he honestly doesn't want to be kind of reincarnation of this Brezhnev or other Partagenosa. So he would like to be closer to people, better thinking. And when his close aides are telling us that if you want to understand how we act, you should understand who we are and what we are. Therefore, whatever sharp criticism and very well argumented criticism we have, they are living different life. And therefore Zelensky really is successful in convincing people using media. And again, it's body language. It's like after Brezhnev, after all these general secretaries died, how shocked Soviet people were that Gorbachev could walk alone and he could talk. Moreover, he could stop in the center of Kyiv. And that was amazing that Secretary General is not like one of us, but he talks. You can see him, you can hear him. Therefore, this effect probably is the very big challenge for those Ukrainian professional politicians who have so many years in parties and who just never managed to convince people that they are one of.
Oleh Borisovich, I want to now briefly focus and give all Marie and Haran also the word, but briefly, what are the main domestic politics achievement of Zelensky? I know you've been lobbying very hard for the change of the electoral code with Center UA, but how would you define, would you say are the three most important domestic achievements of Zelensky in this parliamentary term so far?
Yeah, I would agree with what Olexiy Haran says. Yeah, but I would put the election is okay, but he also, formally, he also has managed to convince parliament to vote for end of absolute immunity from responsibility, that now there is no immunity which was enjoyed by many of members of parliament. We can discuss later on, and there are lots of arguments for and against, but people like it. It was promised. Land reform is also on the same stage. Again, he initiated reform on impeachment law on president. Again, there is lots of criticism, but why it was not by his predecessors, I don't know. But mostly he managed to create the illusion that really they are very new, they are not part of the old, and the things he always repeats that I am not making money in this office, and looks like people believe that others do, but not him.
Okay, Oleg Borisovich, I want to now turn to Professor Haran and then to Marie again. So when you reflect on the main achievements, you have alluded to what experts view, Olexiy, the land market reform and the anti-Kolomoisky law. What would you say are the main domestic achievements and then pitfalls? And there's already a question directed more to you from the audience, from Rebecca Harms, who is also helping us in our project. She's asking about how the public perceives the personnel changes, because people from civil society are claiming that there is a revanche happening. People from Yanukovych government are coming back. So achievements and then the setbacks and the personnel. How do you see that, Olexiy Haran?
Thank you very much. Actually, I have realized that in my presentation, I covered not only polls, but also domestic politics. So basically, I have already responded to that. I would add, maybe if we are talking about some positive things of what Zelenskyy is doing, yes, he changed the political landscape. He brought very many new people into the politics, and some of them are quite good. And they demonstrated their position, for example, in discussing the situation over the Donbass and around Yermak. Actually, there was kind of muted opposition within Zelenskyy party, and I think this is quite positive, because people, they demonstrated they do care about Ukrainian national interest. But otherwise, I would say the results as to his personnel policy are very mixed, and there is a question about his recruitment policy. I think he's relying either on non-experienced people whose advantage only are personal connections with Zelenskyy and his Kvartal 95, and we are talking about kvartalizatsiya strany, quartalization of the country, because there are so many positions which are filled by those people who were close previously to Zelenskyy business, or we see the return of some old faces, or attempts to return the former members of Yanukovych cabinet of ministers, like Tihipko or like Kharashkovsky. And Zelenskyy recognized himself that he was talking with them about possibility to be in charge of the government, and this is I cannot comprehend it at all. You know, I have no words, because this would be return of you know, people who created Yanukovych, who participated in the creation of Yanukovych regime. So unfortunately, I'm very skeptical about his recruitment policy. And the question from Rebecca Harms was about
revenge, about these people.
Revenge of Yanukovych. Well, we do not put it in the polls. I don't remember the questions which were formulated in such a way in the polls, but civil society is talking about the revenge. Yes, and we see the signs of it. Again, this is very mixed, you know, because on the one hand, we see really dangerous proposals from Mr. Yermak. On the other hand, for example, we see a new Ukrainian Vice Prime Minister, Mr. Reznikov, who is now one of the representatives in Minsk, and he made very strong statements which infuriated Russians. So, but in general, I would say that the general atmosphere is in the country, and activization of pro-Russian forces and people connected with pro-Russian lobby. These are very bad signs.
Okay, maybe can get back in Marieluise. When you look at the past year of Zelensky's domestic politics, what, not legislation, but what trends did you see? You already said you saw the young people leaving, so this hire and fire policy is something you mentioned, but what other trends do you distill from this 1 year of the presidency?
Well, yes, first maybe I have to tell you that Berlin, if you take the political Berlin, we said, who is Zelenskyy? What does he want to do? Where does he want to go? And what publicly was known, the second name, which was the white elephant in the rule, that was Kolomoisky. And is he a puppet of Kolomoisky or not? So then there was this private bank, and for us here it was, okay, if Kolomoisky gets it back, we will know that he's a puppet of Kolomoisky. If he doesn't get it back, he maybe is a free man. You could see that this private bank law obviously was because the IMF had the money and said, either you now jump or you're not going to get it. So I think this law in the end, how it then happened, was not really a totally free decision by a President Zelenskyy and his team. We are starting the oligarchs, not because they are oligarchs, but if they are not behaving and moving within the institutions. And I think this is the main question. We have to talk about institutions. Ukraine being a country that does not have functioning institutions since so many years. And what really, besides special fields of politics of interior, is really making me nervous, and it did from minute number one. And somebody talked about the Electoral Commission, which was with no reason sent home. The feeling that there is something like the winner takes it all. And the winner takes it all, this is not democracy. Democracy is, yes, we have won the elections. Once in a while you need partners, then you need to negotiate. Then you have an opposition. Then you have to really take into account what their arguments are. The way the seating in the Rada was being done really upset me. I looked at that and said, are they crazy? They want to be a new modern democracy. And what do? They exclude the opposition and put them into the back seat. I was really upset. And this was of a high symbolism. It means, democracy means sticking to rules. You can't just say, okay, and within 3 days, we want this law, we need this law, it's a good law. Go ahead, you guys, no matter whether the commissions had possibilities to discuss it or not. The ministries, you have to learn what does a ministry mean. You have experienced people. They sit there usually all their life, 40 years. They get different bosses. The different bosses come with different ideas, which they have promised during their campaigning, which might mean changing politics. But the experts within the ministries, of course, stay and have to move and behave according to the new political ideas. And what we have seen is that the winner takes it all. Step number one is taking the ministry, sending home as many people as we can get rid of, bring in our buddies, friends, and I don't know who, and losing knowledge in a country like Ukraine. And this is really what makes me most nervous, along with this idea of vendetta. Now, if they now go after Poroshenko, and then we will have a Poroshenko in jail, And we will have big campaigns like there were with Yulia Tymoshenko. I mean, if you want to create trust, and Zelensky has to create trust, he will be surprised how fast trust can be created if you have good tools like TV shows, being young, being hip, being sportive, being good looking, like the Kennedy of Ukraine. Can be very fast, you go up all the way, but I tell you, being an experienced politician, it can go down just as fast. And creating trust is something which needs very decided, careful, well overlooked step by step. And it is not making big jumps. It is not about vendetta, and it's not only about show, because the show is over pretty soon. And to be honest, over here, if you talk about Berlin, we look at him, we say he looks very sympathetic. I, for example, liked very much that he addressed the people of Ukraine in Russian also, because I thought Poroshenko was excluding them too much. That was not a good sign. I liked it. But we ask ourselves, is he naive? Or does he have a plan which we don't know? And this is not good. Yeah, I think it's not good for the outside countries, where I always admit that we are not doing the best job. Our governments are not doing the best job. I'm clear on that. But also, if you want strong support from the countries within Europe, they need to have trust in him and in the people surround him. And running a government is not a family enterprise, and it's not an enterprise of friends. It's an enterprise of knowledging people.
These are nearly nice closing words, but I want to close the...
Hanna has her turn. I'm going to shut up now.
No, we have many questions also from the audience, but I want to close the domestic politics block and ask about corruption, because obviously the fight against corruption was one of the main promises of Zelensky. So maybe Oleh Rybachuk or Professor Haran briefly on the fight against corruption. Did we make progress or not? And if not, why? What's holding this progress up? And we have another, maybe Oleh Rybachuk starts, and we have another poll about this too. Fight against corruption. Oleg, we can't hear you just now.
Mute.
Yeah, now we can.
Now I know how the machinery works. Yeah, briefly, I would say that when Zelensky is repeating himself many times that unlike his predecessor, he is not top corruption manager, I would probably agree. But when I talk to many colleagues of mine, and I started my career in customs, I know lots of things. When I hear that in tax administration, in the Ministry of Interior, in Secret Service, they still continue to fight economic crimes. When I hear about corruption as usual at medium level, I understand that corruption as an institution is not there. Probably Zelensky doesn't want it. He is not personally motivated involved, but he didn't break the neck of that system. So the institutions are weak. Moreover, Zelensky tries. I was surprised by Zelensky's personal interview where he was discussing Mr. Nefedov as the guy who was responsible for customs. And he said, I told him, let's create a special groups of anti-corruption, battalions or whatever, and they moved in rapid enforcement law, moved in and just kill corruption here, kill corruption there. So I was really shocked knowing how the system works and really realizing that it would be like I'm watching now, thanks to isolation, this Narcos movie, that it's not the way you kill corruption, but probably Zelensky believed. So he would like to control personally all independent bodies like corruption bureau and corruption prevention, and it is obvious he would try, or his administration, whatever, would try to have a whole say, and they believe that they are good guys, they would fight it. I don't believe into this.
All right. Your view is similar to the view of our audience. The audience also very critical of the achievements in the fight against corruption. Now let's close the block and try to look forward. And I'm now trying to include the questions from the audience. But Olexiy, Haran, I want to begin with you. Zelenskyy has, as it seems, lost his parliamentary majority. And Novoye Vremya last week was titling basically reforms are over or very slow. So looking forward into the second year of Zelenskyy presidency, what do you expect given the absence of an absolute majority? You're still muted.
Yeah, first of all, about majority in the parliament. Yes, he doesn't have the majority he had right after the elections, but I would say he still has a majority. In some cases, he needs support from other factions, and if he would like to continue with the reforms, he may receive this support. First of all, from European Solidarity, from Poroshenko, and then from liberal Golos faction. And we saw this support in the adoption of the land reform and anti-Kolomoisky law. So if he would like to continue with the reforms, I think there would be enough voices within the parliament.
All right, thank you for the brief answer. Now it's going to be a little bit more hands and forth. Hanna, we finally want to bring back you. There was a question about foreign policy. Sorry for keeping you waiting so long. There's someone asking about the prognosis, your prognosis for the foreign policy. So the second year going forward, what do you expect in foreign policy? What are the priorities going forward for Zelenskyy?
There are several expectations, and we're building them. First of all, on his law for reforming of the country, where one of the chapters is about the foreign policy. So first of all, we are expecting that foreign policy will be concentrated in two directions. First directions is Normandy format and everything what he can get about the relations with the Russian Federation. Here I expect that we again activate the activities within the international courts. At least there are certain signals that this can happen. But unfortunately, we also will see the same tendency of his appeasement towards the Russia. And that's also always a possibility if Russia decides to make any aggressive steps either in Crimea or in Donbass because of their own reasons. So definitely this can change his perceptions and actions as well. The second dimension, it will be everything about expert community. So both for exports of Ukrainian goods abroad, finding the new markets, traveling to the destination, if quarantine allows us, definitely with the airplanes and everything, but at least we see the signal that he is ready to travel to meet personally with those countries where Ukraine expect to export. We already heard about possibility for his Latin American tour that was planned for this year. And also a lot of activities about attracting investors to Ukraine. At least that is the spheres that he feels himself much more stable, and probably that he can do something. What we also can expect that he would not pay attention to the Black Sea that we used to see the last year, that is becoming an important region. We are not expecting big steps about the neighbors. He definitely would like to improve relations with Hungary and Poland, but we see that he still doesn't know how to do it. So that's definitely will be under the question. And if we go to the European Union and NATO, here I think that NATO is still terra incognita for him. So he will go after the European Union dimension, and here we'll try to speak about, as we call it, functional dimensions. So speaking about open sky or about new quotas within the deep and comprehensive free trade agreement, or about, for example, roaming eliminations, something like this. So not political level, but more functional economic level of the relations with the European Union, something something what is closer to him and what he seems closer to the domestic development in Ukraine.
And there's another question to you and to Marie, I guess. It's from Maria Zolkina, a colleague of Olexiy Haran from Facebook. She's asking about the return of the so-called sandwich thesis. I'm paraphrasing her words. So the question is, between 2014 and 15, there was pressure from above, from the international community, and below from civil society. The question really regards this. Do you see the return of this model, especially from below and above? Hanna, how do you see it? And then Marie.
No, it seems to me that it is not a situation now because we don't see the pressure from the international community at the same level as it used to be. And here is the very difficult situation because on one hand, we were sometimes in closed door conversation criticizing our Western colleagues saying that, okay, we understand all that should be changed, but let's be honest, if we're only criticizing, it makes life more difficult. We need also some psychological support. And now we're in the completely opposite situation where we see that we have more domestic criticism about the action of Zelenskyy, especially if we talk about Donbass and even more when we talk about Crimea. And the international community became much more softer about the Ukrainian leadership, much more optimistic than Ukrainian voters, sometimes I think, or just paying less attention. I understand that especially with the COVID-19, all leaders prefer to concentrate on their domestic issues. Some of our countries witness elections that also bring additional problems and they concentrate on their domestic situation. But also that leads to the consequences that we see that they allowed Ukrainian leadership to go further with their ideas, hoping that it is, okay, he promised something new, he wants a peace, let him try. And it looks that after 1 year, it's probably, and we saw it with the situation when Germany was not so happy about the consultative council that was proposed by Mr. Yermak. So it was quite a good sign that probably it is time for our international partners to be back in this trio.
Marie, do you want to add on the international dimension? Do you expect more attention, less attention, softer or harder stance in the second year of Zelenskyy presidency?
I think and I hope that the pressure from below is staying strong and getting even more experience, more knowledgeable, more steady, and hopefully strong enough to withstand if there is no more and new disappointments. This is what really makes me worry. The poor Ukrainian people have been going through so many disappointments. And it is really breaks my heart, you know, they really have deserved that now they can rely. So below, if you talk about civil society and grassroots, above is very, very big problem. I talked about France and Germany. You know that EU is in a bad shape. Let's not talk about the United States. Kremlin still knows what they want and where they want to go. And we have not mentioned it today, but I think you have to mention it. Corona, of course, brought all of us into a situation which we never even could have been thinking or dreaming about 2 years ago, not even a year ago. That means all our countries, EU, United States, we don't even know where it's going to go. Russia doesn't talk about it, we have no numbers. But course, they are all coming into terrible economical and financial situations. And we will not use the slogan EU first, like Trump always did. But of course, there will be some pressure us first, our population first. So, it is so unbelievable. We have not seen the end yet. We don't know whether the fall is going to bring us a new wave. But many of the hopes, and when Ukraine started pretty well, and with a prime minister who said 7 or 9% growth per year, of course, this country has recession, And we are having recessions, and recession, of course, means less money, and Ukraine needs a lot of money. So please, this is my wish, don't waste your energy on vendetta, but get together the experienced people. I think in a situation like that, in a country like Ukraine, you should be talking about a government of unity instead of having in Sluha Narodu, I don't know how many people who are being paid by Kolomoisky, which we know. So please understand that we are all going into unbelievable, difficult times, in not only in Ukraine, all the countries, and those countries who want to help. Germany still wants to help. So understand it's not a time for gambling around anymore. And populism, no matter how sympathetic it comes along, will not be able to create what we need and what the people need. So it's time for very serious, knowledgeable, dedicated, trustworthy people who have to play together internationally, because Corona is not a national affair.
Right. We have very few minutes left. There are several unanswered questions, so I will now do a little hands and forth with Olexiy and Oleh Rybachuk, because these questions regard domestic politics, but obviously Marie's warning that the West will be preoccupied more with itself is very important. So there is a question, maybe we start with you, Olexiy, regarding the handling of the press. There were several questions regarding this. Zelenskyy only last week gave his second ever press conference. So this tells us a lot about how he handles the press. How do you view his handling of the press going forward? Try to project it into the second year. Do you see there a certain trend, a positive, worrying trend with the press? Short answer.
In relations with the press? Quite, I would say, quite manipulative. And this is a style of Zelenskyy. It's not just during this press conference. It was already seen during his first press conference. So he didn't care much about the substance of the answers, but about the way of presenting, the form in which he presented it, and even, assaulted some journalists, like denouncing them for being representative of Radio Svoboda, which is funded not by Ukraine. So, and this is a long debate in Ukraine, what is better, to be funded by the US or by Germany or by BBC, by the UK, or to be funded by the oligarchs? What would be more independent? So I stop here. Unfortunately, I see it again. Zelenskyy is very good, and his team is very good in PR. And I see the question whether Zelenskyy could be re-elected. Yes, he can. We don't know. It's still he has 4 years, but we will see. The question is not about Zelenskyy himself. Imagine that we remove Zelenskyy. Okay, he is ousted. Who will be the president? Okay, this is a question. Mr. Razumkov, according to the constitution, right? And actually, there are some rumors that actually Razumkov is already in the phase of preparation for this. And this again reflects the weakness of institutions, the weakness of parties. The Ukrainians are talking about political projects, but not about, real parties. So now what we see is actually the vacuum for new leaders, because I think the old leaders are not capable of filling this gap.
Very well. Last words to Oleh Rybachuk. We heard this leadership vacuum and the lack of institutions. How do you see the second year going forward with the weak political situation alliance in the parliament, weak institutions? What is your final prognosis or your final say on the second year?
Well, we have to remember that after pandemic would be over, Putin is thinking about his elections and rebuilding his system. That would be influencing, and it influences Ukraine very well. We know elections in US, again, that would have a major impact on what's happening on. But about Ukraine, we can't change people. And I really stopped playing this game, who will be next, because I know very well. I just happened to be in many power hills in Pechersk. I know from within, and I can very responsibly say it's not about personalities. And then the next question is, okay, you mentioned election reform, means next election we'll be having on party based only. Where are the parties? And here is the question again. Some people would try to build parties, but they probably would be building parties in the old style already. It means we get together, find some money, then we are looking for party members. We create collective farm, then we're looking for collective farmers. I don't believe in this approach, but I know that that's also the biggest problem of civil society. When you start analyzing like that, you always shift responsibility for somebody. But for civil society, we have to compete now with parties by trying to influence or to educate voters. We can't change them. They are going to vote for somebody we believe who is stupid. If we are so smart, we should find the ways to share our wisdom with people. And virus is a bad alliance here because we have to stay at homes. But as soon as the door is opened, I am again prepared, and we will start another massive educative campaign to help voters not to repeat the same story. It's very ungrateful job, again, because we are not parties, but I don't see any other way. There is no successful presidential country in Europe where strong presidency, those are mostly dictatorial things. So this is the management issue. So we have to speak about this, because we have elections in autumn and we'll have elections again. So people would be electing. So we must educate them. It's a big job, never ending.
On that note, rather somber note, Oleg Borisovich drew the attention to the upcoming local elections, which will be also crucial to observe. For everyone, I encourage you to continue checking the Ukraine Verstehen, our German magazine on Ukraine, and we'll continue to engage with Ukrainian decision makers from parliament and from civil society in Ukrainian, English, and German. Today was in English, so thank you very much, Professor Haran, Marieluise Beck, Oleh Rybachuk, Hanna Shelest. Serhiy Leshchenko didn't join us apparently, but nevertheless, I thought this was an instructive and very helpful discussion to kind of understand the first year and look a little bit into the second year. So with that said, thank you very much, and stay healthy and stay in touch. Goodbye.